There was a time when I would have given anything to have Hollywood make my favorite fantasy novels and series, whether that be The Lord of the Rings, Sword of Shannara, Wheel of Time, anything by Piers Anthony. Good, awesome fantasy, science fiction, absurdist, surreal realities with magnificent characters, strong heroes, true villains that needed to have their ass kicked, and a lot of action in between. Those days are so far gone now. So there are a couple things on everyone's radar as far as what, from a fantasy perspective, is coming to streaming. Obviously, Lord of the Rings, top of the list. Oh my God. If we had any more red flags on this, I think we were in the People's Republic of China. However, I that's not what this video is going to be about. I'm going to talk about the book series by Robert Jordan, The Wheel of Time. Now, for context and explaining why I have the perceptions that I do, I am actually reading the series. I am currently halfway book 3, and yes, you can sit there and then pick apart whatever I'm saying, but understand that my perspective is as a fan and a reader who is in the middle of experiencing this for the first time, which, let's be honest, that's how everyone else is going to see it on wherever the hell this thing's going to be. So that is why I'm saying what I say. Robert Jordan published the first book of the Wheel of Time series way back in 1990. Now, I had just graduated high school the year before, so yes, I'm a dinosaur. The first book was titled The Eye of the World. This sets up, from my perspective as a first-time reader, arguably 3 main male characters and 2 female characters as well from the same village. They all have evolving stories, and it all centers around the world that Robert Jordan so richly created. Now, what's fascinating about this story, about this series arguably, is that the concepts of reincarnation, predestination, and true good versus true evil are absolutely core to the entire narrative. One thing you're not going to find is communism, socialism, racial politics, identity politics, or intersectional feminism. What you will find is a very richly woven world where the magic and the use of magic is very strictly contained to women for reasons based upon myth that have become woven into the fabric of how and why the world was, in its last cycle, destroyed. It's hard to not give away a lot of the storyline here, but I will say this. There is a group of women only, well, let's just say this, of good light-bearing women only that are allowed to channel what is called the One Source. They are called the Aes Sedai, and arguably the ability by not all women, but just some women to channel the power to actually do what is arguably magic can be a curse if it is not, say, the practitioner is not taught how to use it. It will actually drive them mad and destroy them. Now that is especially true for men who, if it is found that men are able to channel, they are immediately either killed or what is called gentled, in air quotes, which was, you can read into that what you will, but the outcome of that is that the men, these just were born with this ability, essentially begin to fade, become depressed, and then they self-delete. Women also can have, if they have the ability to channel magic, to tap the one source, and they use it in ways that are against what the Aes Sedai believe in, will be called what is stilled, which means they have the power stripped out of them. They too also wither and fail to thrive and invariably end up in the same self-deletion place. Now, Robert Jordan's series is fascinating from a fantasy reader's perspective because it draws upon both European and Asian mythology, as well as a strong Buddhist, as well as Hindu, I would say, ethos background. There's a lot of metaphysical concepts in this that, we could sit here and say are also Taoist. It's interesting because it doesn't take place, say, in your typical fantasy world, which, say, has more of a Tolkienian sort of a structure around it. It really is fascinating because you're talking about a story that is existing in a world that was completely destroyed. And what could either be magical artifacts or scientific artifacts seen as magic, you never really understand, at least to the point where I am in book 3. Now that may change as time goes on. That's what makes this so just an amazing story. And again, you're not talking about people walking around in obvious ruins of, say, modern structures. They're walking through cities that are possessed by true evil demon forces that are tempting people all the time, that actually killed their own evil forces, that indiscriminately will attack using what is called magic in this world to destroy and suck the life and soul out of anything that wanders by. It's interesting because, again, the evil is a whole next level of evil. If you're a D&D player, there is some, I would say, lawful evil at the top, but a lot of it is just straight up chaotic evil. I mean, it goes after everything, and that's what makes it so dangerous and crazy. So again, from the perspective of someone who's reading this series for the first time and is halfway through book 3, I will say that this is one of the, I would say, better structured, built worlds with, I would say, a clarity of what countries are, what the histories are that go into those countries, without it turning into a Frank Herbert-like Dune tome. So why am I ranting like this? Where am I going with this? I'm not just running laps, I promise. Why I bring these things up is that the very first book of this series, The Eye of the World, is centered upon, in my opinion, 5 main characters. Rand, Mat, and Perrin, 3 boys from a small ass end of the world village called Two Rivers, and their friends from that village, Edwene and Nynaeve, who happens to be the wisdom or very young wise woman healer. What makes the characters of, at least again, being the halfway through book 3 fascinating is that they're not just markers. They have a lot of resistance to what they want and know they must do, but they really don't want to do it. And they also show the suffering, the self-doubt, and overall resistance to being on the hero's journey and whatever it is for that character. Now let's take Rand al'Thor. Again, being in the middle of book 3, Rand al'Thor is suddenly thrust into a role he has absolutely no desire into being to, which could not just claim his sanity, but also his life. We're also talking about a character named Perrin. Back in his little village, he was just a blacksmith's assistant. Suddenly he's out there swinging an axe, fighting off things that are sort of like trolls meet werewolves, and never knowing if he's ever going to go home. And then he meets someone who is, let's just call, highly attuned with wolves, and that kicks off Perrin's own journey of resistance to what it is that what they call the pattern in the Wheel of Time is weaving for him. Now, the pattern is a concept that has to do with, you could call it predestination, you could also call it fate. The question is, and in these books, is it predestined, or can you actually change the outcome of what the pattern is weaving for your future? It goes back and forth with that, and that's one of the things that makes, in my opinion, this series so damn good. Let's take a look at a character named Matt. Now, Matt is kind of like your typical jokester, bad timing type of friend. He's close with Rand and with Perrin, and is the guy who who has these things that are really bad ideas, and then everyone else just gets caught up in his wake. This is especially true in Book 1, has the party led by Moiraine, at least that's what I'm calling in her head, who is a magical practitioner, and her warder, Lan. They're trying to get away from Two Rivers, and this is, again, I don't want to spoil the book, but they're passing through a city that no one in their right mind would go through. Think about Chernobyl only with demons. We're talking like that level of badness. You would not be strolling through there taking a shortcut unless your very life depended on it. Now, Matt is told not to touch anything, not even a rock off the ground. And of course, what happens when he and Rand and Perrin stumble into a treasure room? Well, let's just say the effects of that decision go on for quite a while in the series. Now, the women characters are awesome, strong, they don't take any shit from anybody, but they don't overshadow the men any more than the male characters overshadow them. Of particular note in the first book is a character that the village calls the Wisdom. This would be the archetype of the crone, the village witch, the village healer, who leads the female part of the city, of the town. They have their own power. They are in the same place as men. It's very egalitarian. But the Wisdom, everybody listens to the Wisdom. What makes this character unique is she is actually very young. This is not a crone. This is not a woman, say, in her middle years. This is someone barely out of being a teenager. And she is extraordinarily against magic use, against Moiraine and Lan and the Aes Sedai in general. She believes the stories that have been handed down for generations, that when these people come, when the female magic users come, whatever they tell you is only a half-truth, and whatever deal they're offering, you're going to regret it later. Her assistant, and someone who is training to someday be a Wisdom, and I'm oversimplifying, yes, is a girl named Egwene. She and Rand actually really like each other, and they plan on spending the rest of their lives together in this sleepy little town until trouble comes into the village. Now, again, I won't ruin the surprise of all this. I will say, however, that how the character's journey is started within the book series is how you want to do it. It's not overly complicated, and yet it's not overly simplified. The world that Robert Jordan has created is something that needs absolutely zero interpretation, much in the way that Peter Jackson took Tolkien's works to create 3 amazing movies. Someone who actually respected the material, the source material, and told the story the way Robert Jordan laid it out would make an incredible amount of money and arguably start, I would say, potentially a franchise just as big as Lord of the Rings. And I do not say that lightly. There's a reason why there are, 14 books now? And even despite Robert Jordan passing and Brandon Sanderson taking over the series, people continue to love and reread this entire series. I actually have been saying to myself, I want to reread the first book, because now, even in the third book halfway through, I am seeing threads that I want to understand the context of it better, because Robert Jordan rewards you for being an astute and observant reader. So, all right, I just fanboyed the hell out of that. What am I talking about? Why should we be concerned about the Netflix adaptation of The Wheel of Time? Well, by all accounts, and looking at the article from today, June 7th, 2021, we are seeing that this is being promoted as a very female empowerment-centric, and I'm terrified that it's going to be identity politics inflicted upon a world that already had a brilliant portrayal of the two genders, oh my God, that exist in that space. It doesn't need a heavy-handed slap of Mary Sue, men bad, men have to be saved by a woman. It doesn't, because those women are strong all on their own. I mean, looking at the character of the Wisdom, you don't want to screw around with that woman the way that she's written. Edwene, brave, you don't need to F with any of it. Also, you don't need to diminish the three boys, Rand, Perrin, and Mat. You don't need to. They're tripping over themselves and pissing themselves enough as it is. I mean, think about it. You're literally grabbing somebody from a small town and dragging them across the world to show them that all of the things that they were warned in bedtime stories as children are not only true, but they're coming for them. That's what makes this story, at least where I am now, so incredibly good. So why am I worried? The official description from Amazon reads, quote, set in a sprawling, epic world where magic exists and only certain women are allowed to access it. The story follows Moraine, a member of the incredibly powerful all-female organization called the Aes Sedai, as she arrives in the small town of Two Rivers. There she embarks on a dangerous world-spanning journey with 5 young men and women, one of whom is prophesied to be the Dragon Reborn, who will either save or destroy humanity, unquote. I am going to say that is an inaccuracy. And I say it from the perspective of someone who, when you actually read book 1, this is not the story of a powerful, magical using woman. This is the story of those 3 young men and women. Rand, primarily, Mat, Perrin, Edwene, and the Wisdom. That's what's so frustrating about this. When you approach a work with an agenda, you only damage what the real beauty of a piece is. Just tell the story the way it's written. Keep your goddamn politics, your worldview, 21st century insanity current year out of the story. Write your own if you want to do that. Leave Robert Jordan, leave Tolkien, leave all of these things alone, and you will not just make a lot of money, not just win in your little Hollywood bubble, but you will create something timeless, something beautiful, something that people will look at in the same way that we do Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Do you know how many copies of the different versions of the DVDs I have? Do you know how many different versions of the printed Tolkien works that I have. And do you know why? It's not because of what was the current political and social trends of when The Lord of the Rings was written or when those movies were made. It was because of the beauty of the story, the characters that were in there. And then when someone did not adapt, but literally just took Tolkien's story the way it was told and made it in on screen, removing themselves and their ego and their narcissism and their political and social views from it, we see what has happened. How much money did those movies make? All right. This is my first video after being gone for a while because I think, like a lot of people, you can only wake up so many times and report on how bad and sideways and bastardized and ruined and mutilated things that we grew up loving as nerds and got our ass kicked for, by the way, to watch these I don't even know what they are in Hollywood. They're mutilating what we love. And they're not even making money off of it. And it just got to me. So for those of you who've stuck with me, for those of you who can put up with me in my really squeaky loud chair, I appreciate it. I will be making videos more regularly. I just needed to get my groove back. As always, I'm Corey B, and this is Salty Salish Sea.